Joining us now, Joseph Menn, a reporter with the Financial Times and the author of Fatal System Error. Nice of you to join us again here on TVO tonight. Enjoyed meeting you yesterday at the MESH conference in downtown Toronto, and here you are again, so thanks for coming back. You said in a recent talk that in 2003, viruses, quote-unquote, went commercial. What'd that mean?
Well, before that, you had a number of people that were writing computer viruses as experiments or for bragging rights, and some of them did pretty silly things, like they would, there was the I Love You virus, which shut down a lot of computers for no apparent reason, and there was the Melissa virus, which professed the virus writer's love for a stripper of that name. And there were some that attacked big-name websites like Yahoo and eBay, essentially for bragging rights, shut down those websites so some teenager could say, I shut down Yahoo and eBay. But it wasn't big business.
Now it is.
Now it is. Starting in 2003, you had spam senders hiring virus writers to round up all these computers through various vulnerabilities and sort of enslave them, frequently without the knowledge of the owners of those computers. And the main reason they did that was that spam was being blacklisted, so they wouldn't accept incoming email from certain addresses. Mm-hmm. If you have PCs all over the world sending spam, you can get past those. So that was the first thing that happened. And then there are other things you can do with, once you have an assembled mass army of drone computers, and one of them is attack other websites and shut them down for whatever reason.
Let's just understand who's doing this, because this sounds like it is more advanced, more adventurous, and more dangerous than just the teenagers kidding around in their bedrooms. Is that right?
Yeah, we're talking about organized crime. You know, in the beginning, the main guys, the main spammers, a lot of them were Eastern European, a lot of them are in Russia, and not nice guys, but businessmen. But gradually, since then, it's gotten worse as they've allied more closely with traditional mobs and organized crime.
Okay, businessmen suggest they make money doing this. How do you make money doing what you just described?
Well, spam is really cheap to send. If you have one in 10,000 people clicking through, one in 100,000, you can still make money. It's an extremely efficient way of getting your message out there.
So you're blasting to, what, millions of potential email addresses?
Uh-huh.
And if you get 1% return, you're doing just fine?
You're doing great if you get 1%. Yeah.
If you get 1%. So what are they doing? What's in the message, and what are they getting back in return?
Well, it's evolved. I mean, in the beginning, it was just advertising, and it could be advertising. You know, theoretically, it could be advertising a legitimate product. It's usually not. These days, straight-up spam is selling fake pharmaceuticals, largely to the U.S. market. A lot of them pretending to be in Canada because people in the U.S. have some vague awareness that some things, they can get things more cheaply in Canada. So all these...
You know why they have that awareness?
Because it's true. Yes.
That's right.
But they're a little fuzzy on the details, and they don't bother to check that, you know, I don't want to say the name of a website, but, you know, something with RX and Canada in it doesn't mean that it's actually in Canada. In fact, most of those places are in the Ukraine or in Russia and are selling adulterated, dangerous drugs. That's just the straight-up spam. Nowadays, a lot of the emails are also sending malicious links where if you click them, then your computer can get infected and do very bad things to you.
Okay, but again, how does that make money for anybody? That sounds just more mischief than it is money-making.
Oh, no. It's not mischief. You know, the fake pharmaceuticals...
No, not that. That I get, but the kind of virusing your computer.
Yeah, well, what you're installing on your computer these days is much more likely to be a keylogger, which will record every keystroke. The banking Trojans are like that, but they're only triggered when you're making an online transaction.
Banking Trojans?
Oh, yeah. So a Trojan from the Trojan horse is something that is not what it appears to be. In this case, you think it's a video or you think it's a link to a website, and in fact, you're installing this Trojan program. And the keyloggers record your keystrokes. The banking Trojans say, wait until you go to Bank of America or PayPal or some other site, and watch as you type in your username and account number and password, and if that's all they need, then they can just rob you blind then. Some of the newer ones are so sophisticated that even if you have a little token with a constantly changing number, a one-time password, they can piggyback on a legitimate transaction and transfer money at the same time. They'll even slow you down, and they might get they might use other techniques. So you think, well, I'm having trouble getting through, and they'll have a customer service rep email you and say, don't worry, you know, just keep trying, you'll get through. In the meantime, they're shoveling money out the back.
Now, when you say organized crime, we have an impression, I think, those of us of a certain generation have an impression of, you know, mafia or, you know, whatever. Are those the same folks who are behind all of this?
Well, the sort of five families mafia that we have in the U.S. is trying really hard, and they've done some good things. There was one. It is an internet scam run by the Gambinos a few years ago out of New York City. Was the largest money-making venture in Gambino history, but it was only $650 million. They're way behind. That is chump change. The really good guys are Russian organized crime, Ukrainian organized crime, really scary people.
Operating over there or over here?
Over there, over there. The wonderful thing about the internet is you can be anywhere and appear to be somewhere else.
You can be anywhere, but clearly those communities have they got a lot of people over here too. Why would they be over there instead of over here?
Well, I think the government here would be loath to protect them, and I don't think the government over there has any particular problem about protecting some of these people.
Why do you say that?
Well, for my book, I went to Russia. I interviewed Russian law enforcement, Russian prosecutors, Russian security experts, you know, the book chronicles in part the experiences of a British detective who went over there and worked for 3 years very closely with their equivalent of the FBI. And he found out when he tried to get, he was successful in getting some guys thrown in jail, which was an unprecedented case. Unfortunately, it remains, that precedent hasn't been followed since either. And he found out when he went upstream that some of the very worst criminals were being protected by the FSB, which is the successor agency to the KGB.
And why would they be protecting them?
Well, you might think, if you know a fair amount of about Russia, that it would be garden variety corruption. And garden variety corruption is an enormous problem in Russia. But this is actually worse than that. These same people and their drone armies of computers and their networks of really good programmers and engineers are being used for military purposes, both outside of the country when they attack websites such as the government websites in Estonia that were shut down in 2007, and Georgia that were shut down in 2008, and also attacking dissidents within the former Soviet Union.
Okay, organized crime, again, as I understand it, is so serious that people are often killed. Does that happen here as well?
One of the three men in this ring of cyber extortionists that was ultimately sent to 8 years in jail had the opportunity to work for King Arthur, a man known as King Arthur, who was protected by the FSB. And while he was a criminal, and he was a very kind of promiscuous criminal. He worked with lots of different other criminal groups. He wouldn't work with King Arthur because he knew that if he ever had a business dispute with King Arthur would have him killed.
So this is as serious as that?
This is guys with guns. These are bad guys.
Let's talk, you mentioned the British fellow, who I think since retired, has he not?
Yes, he has.
Okay, you mentioned him. There's another fellow as well, a young guy named Barrett Lyon, who is the young, if I can put it this way, protagonist of your book in a way. He's the young hero. Tell us about him.
Sure. So Barrett Lyon is a really interesting guy, really nice guy. When I met him and when he got involved in this stuff, he was 25.
American.
American. He's from Lake Tahoe area of Northern California. Very severely dyslexic. Used to, would try and read one line and would see three and would just try to pick the one in the middle. Wasn't at all clear he was going to graduate high school, but he found computers very liberating and got into that world in a very big way. Very, very smart guy technologically. He was hired in 2003 to protect some of the websites that were being attacked by these cyber extortionists. They were overwhelming the websites with traffic and saying you have to pay us $40,000 to Latvia via Western Union or your website's never going to come back up.
So big companies would hire him to stay sort of one step ahead of the criminals.
That's right. So he beefed up their defenses, and then he went above and beyond the call of duty, and he went back to the computers that were attacking the websites, saw where they were getting their orders from, their electronic marching orders, and it was from an internet relay chat channel in Kazakhstan. And he infiltrated that channel. He pretended to be somebody who had his own bot network, and he said, "Oh, I just followed my bots back in here, and they're connecting to your server instead of my server. What are you up to?" And he said that he joined forces with them, helped them with their code, and he cleared this with the FBI. But over the course of a couple months, he went undercover, And he eventually, incredibly, teased out a real name and a real address of one of the bad guys in Russia.
And what happened?
Well, the FBI didn't really care very much, but the Brits cared a great deal. For a while there, the Brits did cybercrime law enforcement like nobody else. They created this special elite unit called the National High-Tech Crime Unit, and they had these great cops like Andy Crocker, the second hero of the book. People came from intelligence backgrounds, people who'd worked at technology companies, just really good cops. And they, among other things, they knew that the trail of serious cybercrime almost always goes overseas, where cooperation is really hard to get. So what they did is, before they needed help, they would send somebody over there and take the head of the cybercrime unit out for dinner and say, do you need some new computers? How can we help you? And developed personal relationships so that when they actually needed help on a big case, then that person would be there to pick up the phone and help.
Is your country, do you think, more serious about trying to ferret this out and put an end to it now?
We're more serious than we were. I don't think we're dramatically better than we were. In the case that Andy and the National High-Tech Crime Unit cared a lot about the case that involved Barrett, because the same gang had started with offshore gambling companies in Costa Rica that Barrett was protecting, but then they went after legal, publicly traded British companies. So the Brits sent some agents to meet with Barrett in Los Angeles, and then they sent Andy to Russia, and he lived there for 3 years working on this case. We haven't sent anyone to Russia for 3 years to work on a single case.
Okay, my recollection, though, was that when President Obama came into office, he was talking about appointing some cybercrime czar. Did he ever actually do that?
It took him about 6 months. He made that announcement in May, part of an unprecedented speech devoted entirely to cybersecurity, and he said he would appoint a cybersecurity policy coordinator, and he did that. Howard Schmidt is the man, and he took office in January. So
January of this year.
January of this
like
year.
5 months ago.
Yeah, but he has to worry not just about crime, but about cyber war and all kinds of things.
How's he doing?
So far, so good. It's early. I think he's got some good initiatives coming. He said last week that we're going to have a national strategy on online transactions, which I think is very important. I mean, the title of my book, Fatal System Error, is meant to suggest that the whole system of the internet is in trouble, and it is. The system of communications isn't going to collapse tomorrow, but the way we rely on it now for ways in which it was not intended, including financial transactions, government business, that sort of thing, that's in pretty serious trouble. And an improved system of secure transactions would be a very good place to start.
Okay, as an example, is it true that you think the bad guys have got half our credit card numbers already?
Yeah, absolutely. I got that from Kim Peretti. She was until recently the head of the U.S. Justice Department's Cybercrime Division.
They believe at the Justice Department that half of all credit card users in the United States basically have lost control of their number. Is that right?
That's right. And it gets really interesting when they get half of our debit card numbers, because that's a much more direct pipeline into your bank account.
Somebody's got to be doing something about this, isn't there? I mean, they've got to be getting serious about this.
It is a huge problem, and it's an interdisciplinary problem.
Meaning what?
Well, it's a technology issue, and it's a law enforcement issue, and it's a foreign policy issue. And it's very hard to get a handle on all of it. In addition, the vast majority of critical infrastructure is in private hands in the U.S. So it's we can't just tell the big phone companies, okay, start barring malicious traffic from Moldova or wherever. They're private companies. If we want them to do something, we have to regulate it. And there's been a pretty serious feeling in Washington against regulation for a lot of years.
And, well, they've got their hands full regulating financial institutions right now.
They do.
So is there much of an appetite on Capitol Hill to get serious about this? Because this sounds pretty bloody serious.
It is pretty bloody serious. And yeah, there is actually a window of opportunity to do things about it, in large part because Google went public in January with the attacks on it by hackers. It certainly would appear working at the behest of the Chinese government. That really elevated the discussion from one where technologists talk to each other and try to get the ear of the CEO or somebody in government to pay attention to a much broader discussion about foreign policy and economic espionage, which I think is a more serious threat than straight up cyber war. So there are a number of bills in Congress that would actually do some things. There's one sponsored by Senators Rockefeller and Snow, one from each side of the aisle. And among other things, that would call for greater information sharing between the government officials and power grid operators. Even if it's classified information about attacks, now they have to tell the operators what's happening, and then the operators, if this passes, would have to take steps to address it.
Well, you would think that even if the U.S. government, you know, I mean, they got a lot on their plate, let's face it, but you'd think MasterCard or Visa or American Express would be, this be pretty high up their priority list, wouldn't you think?
You'd think, but no. The reason that there has not been a lot of movement by the banks to make this stuff more secure is that they generally don't get stuck with the tab. They're starting to now, but historically what happens when an identity gets stolen, somebody steals your credit card, makes a purchase, it goes back, you complain to the bank who issued the credit card, say, I didn't do this. They reverse the charge and they stick the retailer with it. The retailers spend 10% as much in Washington as the banks do, so that's not going to change. The retailers just raise everybody's prices a little bit. So the economy suffers slowly, and there aren't people marching in the streets complaining that this is a terrible problem. So we're the proverbial boiling frog, and there isn't a sudden thing where we realize we're in trouble. Now the banks are starting to get, it's starting to get a lot uglier because the bad guys are now writing code that attacks small businesses and cleans out their bank accounts, and they are generally not made whole by anybody. So we have some small businesses going bankrupt in the US and suing their banks saying, well, you're responsible, and the banks say, no, you got the virus on your PC, it's not our problem. So that's quite ugly, and could lead to some changes.
Let me ask you one last thing, Joseph, because you know as much about cybercrime as anybody I've ever met. What will you and what won't you do online?
I will not use a debit card online, and nobody should. I will not go online without an operating system that updates automatically, antivirus that updates automatically, and a firewall that checks both inbound and outbound traffic that also updates automatically. If I do anything on business online, and I do some, I'm not promiscuous about it. I will go to very famous places.
So you will use your credit card online?
I will. What's more important, there are plenty of things that people can do to protect themselves, but what's most important is a mindset change. It used to be that you could assume that unless your computer started spewing pop-ups and moving incredibly slowly, that you were probably okay. You can't assume that anymore. You should assume, in fact, that your stuff is already out there being swapped around in Eastern Europe, and you should check your credit card bills, you should check your credit reports, you should check your banking statements to make sure you don't see anything unusual.
Good stuff. Fatal system error. Joseph Menn, once again, nice to meet you at Mesh earlier yesterday, and thanks for being on TVO tonight.
Thanks very much for having me.